The Kardashians historically have had their grubby little mitts in everything, from literally selling pig slop to pretending to go to law school. And I have been working on a series where I've been researching for months and putting together a series that is comprehensive and shows you the trail of all of the shadiness historically of the Kardashian family and how it leads to politics like we have today. Private jets, Bible verses, psychics, prophets, and scandal. Nope, I'm not talking about the Righteous Gemstones. I'm talking about the Righteous KimStones. Now, this story of psychics, scams, and generational trauma goes back a few centuries to when the Kardashians were going by the Kardashoffs. Now, the Kardashians had to leave Russia because they were fleeing from religious persecution. They were Pentecostal Christians. They were referred to as jumpers or the milk drinkers, and everyone else was Russian Orthodox. Part one of my Righteous KimStones deep dive is called The Sins of the Family, How Psychics and Oracles Brought the Kardashians to America. In this segment, I'm going to go over how early Kardashians or Kardashoffs built the foundation for modern televangelism and its involvement in right-wing politics. Once they were in Armenia, the Kardashians heard about a child prophet, an 11-year-old Ifil Klubaniakin, who penned an apocalyptic forecast despite apparently being illiterate. So this is what he said: "Those who believe in this will go on a journey to a far land, while the unbelievers will remain in place." The boy prophesied, "Our people will go on a long journey over the great and deep waters. People from all countries will go there. There will be a great war. All kings will shed blood like great rivers. Two steamships will leave to cross the impassable ocean." And these were ships that were going to America. And surprisingly, there were a lot of Armenians who listened to this prophecy and followed through on traveling to America from their small village in Armenia. And it looks like ultimately that child prophet was right, because by leaving immediately, they escaped not only the Armenian genocide that is still going on, but they also escaped World War I and the Russian Revolution. Tatos and his wife Hannah came to America in 1913, and then they applied for citizenship, and that went through about 10 years later. When the Kardashians came to America, they changed their name to Kardashian, and Tatos Kardashian started going by Tom Kardashian, making his name a little bit more Americanized. Now, when you call the Kardashians trash or Kardashians, technically you're not wrong, because the Kardashian empire that we see today was kind of built on trash. Tatos Kardashian, when he came to America, started a garbage collection company, and at that time the laws were a little bit different, so you could collect the garbage, boil it down, and sell it to farmers as pig slop. So he was making money picking up the trash and selling the trash to farmers, and that is what started the Kardashians that we know today. And this made him the patriarch of the Kardashian family. He went on to marry Hannah, or Hamas Shakarian, and she was related to Demos Shakarian. So Hannah was the aunt of Demos Shakarian, and of course she was Courtney, Kim, Khloe, and Robert Jr.'s grandmother. Now, Demos is who I really want to talk about, because he was one of the founding members of the Christian dynasty that is modern televangelism and prosperity gospel. See, Demos might not be the most interesting to look at out of the Kardashian clan, but he is the most influential. In 1947, there was this faith healer who put his hands on people to heal them. His name was Avak Hagopian, and he came from Iran to America and then ended up doing a tour where he was faith healing and healing people. He originally came to America because a millionaire who owned a winery had a son who got sick, and Avak came over here and said, "I will heal your son within 2 weeks." He did not. But during that 2 weeks he was in California, word spread like wildfire, and so many people were coming to the town where the winery was, where he was healing this young boy, and they were all trying to get healed themselves. This became very overwhelming for the town. There were thousands of people trying to come in and just wait to possibly get touched by this faith healer. And he said it was too many people. He would only touch 60 people a day. So then the town had to make some changes. He ended up going on tour, and that tour was paid for and funded by Demos Shakarian. After funding this Faith Healers tour of America and Canada, a few years later in 1952, Demos founded the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship International in Los Angeles. This was a way to fund, train, and connect future televangelists of America to send them out to spread the word of God and do things like faith healings. Demos also worked to organize, fund, and facilitate evangelical campaigns for Oral Roberts, who was a Pentecostal faith healer and evangelist, later become televangelist. He was from a town just north of Paris, Texas, and was inspired by Pastor Roy Davis, who was using the pulpit to promote the KKK. Now, Oral Roberts was a total scammer. He founded the Oral Roberts Evangelical Association and Oral Roberts University. Demos and Oral were also deeply involved with William Branham. Oral and Branham met at one of the meetings for the fellowship, and Branham was also a faith healer, and he claimed that he had vibrations strong enough to need a watch and money. Like, it was total scam time. And all three were also involved in the National Prayer Breakfast for the Family, which, if you don't know, the Family is kind of an underground evangelical cult that kind of runs everything and connects evangelicals and politics and dark money. This prayer breakfast also connected David Berg of the Children of God cult to Demos Shakarian and this whole group. Demos Shakarian also played a key role in the launch of TBN, the Televangelist Network. And if you match up Khloe Kardashian's stories, she shares a lot of posts from TBN. So I feel like the family is still connected to these televangelist ties. Demos and the fellowship also helped get the initial funding for Joel Osteen's father, John Osteen, helping found the Osteen Ministries. He also helped grow the voice of the Healing Revival, and in 1988, Demos was accused of mishandling some funds, which, are we surprised? So Demos was really misusing fellowship funds. He was using them to pay for his legal, medical, and insurance bills, as well as travel and entertainment purposes. He was put on leave and eventually weaseled his way back into the fellowship, but the person who turned him in said that he will have to answer to God and the IRS, not necessarily in that order. By starting this Christian fellowship, Demos really started the foundation for modern televangelism and prosperity gospel, and he used those funds and the money that was brought into the foundation with untaxed money from religious folks to do whatever he wanted. Now, when you compare that to the Kardashians and the California Community Church, it makes you wonder if that runs in the family. So the Kardashians aren't even the first in their family to start a church that is bringing in money tax-free that they can use however they want. That's most likely going to be used for some political donations to make things easier for them. Who knows? But yeah, their cousin was doing it better, and he set up the foundation for them to carry it out now in present day. And I'm going to get into the deep dive of their church and their pastor Brad in another part of this series. Don't worry. And stay tuned for part 2 that I'm calling The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, where I'm going to be going into Roberl Kardashian's life, his businesses, and his connection to OJ Simpson, and of course, the Beverly Hills Bible study groups that he was part of, where he was rubbing elbows with very famous people that went on to start some very infamous cults. So we're going to go into all of that in the next part. The Kardashians got their start in meatpacking, but it's not how you think. Even though the Kardashians were successful, let's recap the businesses that they were successful in: pig slop, garbage, and meat packing. And they did come under some scrutiny because those are industries that are heavily connected to organized crime. So, allegedly. Part 2 of my Righteous KimStones deep dive is called The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Remember when Rob Kardashian had that failed sock line? Well, it was named after his grandfather, and this is his grandfather, Arthur Kardashian. He was born in 1917 to Armenian American parents. He was first generation American. So I think he was really ambitious. He wanted to start a business, have the family, the whole American dream. And he did start a very lucrative meatpacking business. And then in 1938, he got married to Helen. And he's the only Kardashian to get married to one person and stay married the entire time. It's impressive. I don't know. So Helen, like Arthur, was first generation American to parents who escaped the Armenian genocide and came to America. Now, I'm not sure if Helen's family left Armenia because of the prophecy from the 11-year-old prophet, but the time frame of their leaving would match up to other people who were following the prophecy. So it is very possible that they shared a lot of religious beliefs and they had a lot of shared history there. When they got married, Arthur was 20 and Helen was 18, so there was no weird age gap. And they quickly started their family, having Barbara here in 1939, just 1 year after they got married, Tom or Tommy in 1940, and then had Robert in 1944, which I found interesting because when I saw the birth years, there was a gap, and it seemed like they were on track to have three kids under 3 years old. But it looks like that gap was during the height of World War II in between 1940 and 1944. So maybe that was because of some generational trauma. Maybe there was some busyness at work for Arthur because he did start a very successful meatpacking company during this time. And he, I think, had contracts with the government. So he might have been doing more production in the meatpacking industry, and maybe they just got very busy. Or it could have been because Arthur was dealing with a lawsuit that sounds like it came from a blooper reel. I'm not even going to joke. So this guy came into the meat packing facility to buy some meat directly from the facility. And I guess when he was walking to pick up the meat, they had a conveyor belt that was above him and some meat fell off of it and hit him in the head. I'm sorry, it's not funny. It injured the guy. He tried to sue during this time. So it was a personal injury lawsuit that was going on like around 1943. So that also could have impacted their family planning. Now, it wasn't so unusual that Arthur and Helen, coming from such similar backgrounds with their families leaving Armenia and being Christian and coming to America and heeding this prophecy, because there were a lot of people who were Christians who listened to this prophecy and came to America. And from what I can tell in my research, it looks like that is why there is a larger population of Armenian Americans in Southern California, is because a lot of them were following this prophecy. And when I was originally starting to dig into this like 3 or 4 years ago, that is when I originally found out that there is a huge Armenian evangelical Christian population in Southern California, which I just find very interesting, seeing how Robert Kardashian was so Christian when he went into his born again Christian era. It was very impactful to him, you can tell. Arthur and Helen were definitely chasing that American dream. I think that especially comes from first generation Americans, where there's almost pressure on them to chase after having the perfect family, the perfect job, and really rising up to meet that standard of the perfect American lifestyle. And he was trying to. He was doing very well in his meatpacking business, and then he moved his family to Baldwin Hills, which was a really affluent neighborhood during the 50s and 60s. Now, even though Arthur Kardashian was doing really well for himself in the meatpacking industry, they couldn't just live in any neighborhood that they wanted to. So they lived in this home in View Park, Windsor Hills, or Baldwin Hills, which at that time was impacted by segregation. This neighborhood changed dramatically in 1948 due to a Supreme Court hearing that declared racial covenants unconstitutional. So this neighborhood was desegregated. And because it was such a nice neighborhood, the people who moved in were like higher level celebrities who just happened to be Black or people of color. And he had famous neighbors living around him. He was living around Tina Turner and that awful husband of hers and other celebrities. Now, with Robert Kardashian, I feel like the more I research, the more I find, and it's just a never ending Pandora's box. So I could be wrong about this. I might be corrected later. And I'm sure throughout this series, there are going to be things that I miss or things that I just don't find very interesting, if I'm being honest. So let me just kind of backtrack here, but I think it's interesting that Robert Kardashian benefited from the civil rights movement and he was living in this area, but I could not find any information about him being motivated to be part of that civil rights movement, even though he went to college at USC during the 60s, where they would have been having protests all over the place. There is no proof that he was actually protesting or working with people in any way, shape, or form on the civil rights movement that he was benefiting from and surrounded by during the 50s and 60s, which he would have been a teenager and in his early 20s, which was when most people were protesting during that time. So Robert Kardashian enrolled in USC in 1962 to get his BS in business admin. And at USC on the campus during this time, there would have been people just protesting everywhere for free speech, people who were anti-war, people who were involved in the civil rights movement. And there is no proof that Robert was involved in any of those protest movements. So I was like, well, maybe he was inspired to get into law and to help the little guy. No, when he practiced law, he just focused more on business and contracts. Some referred to him as the fixer, but he was far from like a social justice warrior. Okay. So I'll be honest, I had a hard time finding the timeline of OJ Simpson and Robert Kardashian starting their relationship. And there were conflicting stories. People said that Robert Kardashian in 1967 was a water boy for the USC football team and that he met OJ Simpson briefly then. But in 1967, Robert Kardashian would have been in law school in San Diego. So he couldn't just I guess he could drive 4 hours each way every other day to be the water boy. And then I was like, well, maybe it's some kind of innuendo, but that seems like loser behavior, if I'm being honest, to go from law school back to the college where you graduated just to hang out with athletes. But during this time in the 60s and 70s, athletes were like the influencers we see now. So maybe he was just like his daughter Kim and trying to clout chase or be around people he knew were about to go into the NFL and have more influence. Or maybe he was doing like missionary work and trying to get close to these people, because during the 1970s, early 70s, Robert Kardashian was involved in some very culty beginnings of churches and cults that he was going to. And during this time in the 70s, there were laws changing and rules changing. People were in protest. They were angry about the war and things going on in the world. And so they were looking for meaning. You can see that there was an uprising in cults in the early 70s and, in the 70s in general during this time. And Robert Kardashian was around some of the beginning stages of those cults that were starting in people's homes as Bible study groups. I'm going to get more into that in the next video, but there's a lot to unpack with that, and it's all connected back to Demos Shakarian, and the woman that Robert dated after Kris was his cousin. And there was a cult leader, allegedly, who said that it was cute because Robert and his cousin were engaged and they were kissing cousins. Next, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into Robert Kardashian in the 70s because it started with him taking Elvis Presley's ex to cult meetings and ended with him marrying Kris Jenner, then Kardashian. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Robert Kardashian in the 70s, and this era is very fascinating to me because this was Robert Kardashian's born-again Christian era, and he was using it as a way to rub elbows with rich and famous people at Bible studies in their homes in Malibu and Beverly Hills. During this era for Robert Kardashian, a lot of things were happening all at once. He had graduated law school, now he's practicing corporate law, and he also started this magazine with his brother Tommy, Radio and Records magazine. So R&R magazine quickly became a staple for the music industry, and it was quick. It took off like lightning. Now, because of this, Robert went from just being a lawyer to now rubbing elbows with very rich and famous people. And at the same time, there's this Jesus movement that's happening that was kind of rolled over from the hippie movement that's going throughout Southern California and spreading like wildfire. This is the beginning of a lot of the cults we see now. We're starting in people's homes in Beverly Hills and Malibu with a bunch of different celebrities, where these preachers were kind of just throwing things at the wall to see what stuck. And from that evolved a lot of culty religious groups that were funded by celebrities. During this time, Robert Kardashian's cousin, Shakarian, that I was speaking about earlier, was full throttle with the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship International during this time. And what they were doing was really blending politics and right-wing evangelical Christianity. And it was working to the point of the CIA put out this about Demos Shakarian and other evangelical movements, saying that they could possibly be used as a tool to help them in other countries. If they were evangelizing for prosperity gospel, then that would be moving people away from leftism or communism or societies where people didn't depend so heavily on capitalism. And the CIA saw the potential in that and wanted to use it. And this is a cousin that was so close with Robert Kardashian that he eventually dated his Shakarian cousin, who was on this side of the family, to the point of people calling them kissing cousins. And that's who he dated after him and Kris got divorced in the 90s. Before I get into Robert Kardashian's love life and his feud with Elvis and the OJ of it all, I just want to touch a little bit on what was going on with his brother Tom at this time. So Tom was still working at the meatpacking plant, and apparently he got into some trouble where he was trying to bribe a USDA inspector so he could sell some tainted meat, and that got him into a lot of hot water. And even though Robert Kardashian was practicing law during this time, I couldn't find anything anywhere that said that he represented his brother or he was helping his brother during this time. But Tommy did get off with an unusually light sentence. And then later, Tommy was pardoned by George W. Bush, which, I don't know, it just seems kind of strange for bribing a official of the government. He didn't really get in a lot of trouble. He didn't serve any time. He ended up doing community service, and he got pardoned by a president years later. I think that's just interesting, because it wasn't like they were estranged or anything. And I mean, maybe this was criminal law as opposed to corporate law, so maybe it just wasn't Robert's wheelhouse. But he didn't help his brother through this, but his brother still got through it pretty scot-free. And Robert only really practiced law through the 70s. He went into his Shark Tank era in the 80s, and then he was, doing his family man thing. And he wasn't practicing law until the OJ Simpson trial happened and he reinstated his license. Now, some people think that he reinstated his license so he couldn't be called to be a witness. Some people think other things, but it wasn't really his wheelhouse to work in criminal law. And it almost seems like he helped OJ Simpson more than his own brother, which is just odd, I think. So Kris and Robert met when she was 17 and Robert was 28 at the racetrack in Del Mar. So Kris herself said she lied about her age and said she was a little older, but she couldn't place a bet at the racetrack. And you would think someone who's a little bit older, like Robert Kardashian, who's a little bit more sly because he's a lawyer, would notice that, but he seemed to turn a blind eye to it. So if I have my math right, this meeting at the racetrack happened around 1973, which, side note, is the same year that Priscilla and Elvis got divorced, but we're going to put a pin in that. So they basically dated briefly, had a break, and then got back together and then got married and had the family we know today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this time that they were dating before they broke up. See, Kris was already seeing an older guy with money, and now she was double dipping, and she brought Robert back to the condo she was staying at with her older fiance, and he caught her and Robert fooling around and kicked her out. So Kris's fiance kicks her out, dumps her, and now she's essentially homeless, and he was the guy paying for everything. So she moves in with Robert because she needs a place to stay and someone to pay for everything, which is just interesting because Robert is in his Christian, going to Bible study, conservative era. So even though they were living together, he didn't want to sleep with Kris until marriage. So once Kris moved in, Robert started kind of grooming her to be the perfect Stedford wife. So he stopped courting her, like taking her on dates, and now he's taking her to these Bible studies in Hollywood. And I think that it's because it's this conservative Christian thing where he's in his 30s. He looks better to those Christian business people that he's rubbing elbows with if he's on the hunt for a nice little wife. And there are a few people who say that Robert Kardashian was obsessed with the Stedford Wives. So the Stedford Wives, the book came out in 1972, and I don't see conservative Robert Kardashian reading this satirical feminist horror and getting the premise of it, but he liked the idea of having this brainwashed wife that he could program to do whatever he wanted. And Kris recalls that he was giving her tapes to listen to where she would learn how to like throw parties and be a perfect hostess and be a perfect wife. So he loved this idea of molding this perfect young wife to be exactly what he needed to bring around with him, to have kids with, but also just to make him look good. Now, there are some conflicting stories about when they split the first time, because Kris said that it was because Robert was older and she wanted to spread her wings and really live some life before she settled down with him. And then apparently, according to people close to Robert, it was because Kris was a gold digger, like she just wanted money and she was spending a little too much money. See, Kris was looking for a rich man to take care of her, and when she saw Robert in his Rolls Royce and his Gucci outfit, she probably had little dollar signs in her eyes. But Kris says that they split because he was older and she wanted to go live life. So then she went from living with Robert to signing up to be a flight attendant, which I think is interesting because stewardesses or flight attendants at that time, it was a job and a place to live because they helped you find housing. So she was basically a homeless teen who needed somewhere she could go to meet rich men, and being a flight attendant was a way to do that. So while Kris is off in New York, Robert doesn't stop looking for his little wife that he wants. He started bringing another beautiful young lady to these Bible studies in mansions in Beverly Hills, and it's Priscilla Presley. Robert is rich, single, and still has a plan to settle down with his perfect little moldable wife. And I think it's interesting that in his search for a wife, he goes from Kris Jenner, who would have been his teenage child bride, to one of the most infamous child brides in pop culture during this era, Priscilla Presley. It seems like Robert Kardashian had almost like the Southern Republican American dream in mind. He wanted this nice little child bride he could brainwash, who wanted to cook and clean, who he could completely control and just take to Bible study, who wasn't even interested in going out on date night, who just wanted to go to mansions to rub elbows and make him look good. And apparently she did make him look good. Now, I'm going to get into his beef with Elvis because that whole thing is very interesting. Part 3 of my deep dive on Robert Kardashian, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Holy Spirit and Elvis Presley in this segment. So just to recap, it's the mid-70s, and Robert Kardashian is embroiled in this celebrity Hollywood Bible study group that he's going to different mansions across Los Angeles with influential people so he can rub elbows with them, and they like to have people who are married in these groups or trying to get married. So Robert is on a path to find his nice little wife, and other people around him were saying that he was wanting to groom a wife that was moldable into this perfect housewife robot like a Stedford wife. I feel like Robert Kardashian was kind of in this early stages of the manosphere with toxic masculinity, money over everything, and rubbing elbows at church, but not really listening to the gospel. It was more prosperity gospel. Now, this is all just my opinion from a lot of deep dives, and I am just going to say this entire series is just my opinion on information that was presented to me. I'm not saying he's Andrew Tate, but I'm saying that as someone who recognizes patterns, comparisons can be made. So during this time, during the 60s and 70s, cults were becoming wildly popular in California. We had things like Jonestown and other cults that were rising up. And I think it's because obviously there's a lack of Google search engines, things are happening word of mouth. But there's also people who are desperate. There are things like the war happening in Vietnam, and people are looking for purpose, meaning, belonging, and community. And they're finding their way into cults, unfortunately. There's also something about California that draws in charismatic people. So it's very possible that people were moving to California to try to make it in Hollywood, didn't make it, and ended up starting a cult because they could hold a room and speak to large groups of people very charismatically. Or maybe it's people who are moving to California or starting cults in California because they see how many desperate people are there, because so many people move to California with big dreams in mind, and not everybody makes it big. So there are a lot of people who are looking for purpose, looking for meaning, and those are the kind of people who find their way into cults like Scientology. And I do think over time, those cult like figures evolved to become influencers who could hold an audience, have followers, and have people buy whatever they're selling. And these Bible study groups were kind of like the hotbed for the early days of influencing, because at these groups in person, they could sell things like tapes and books. The kind of things you hear about Scientology buying into, those were starting in these Bible studies that Robert Kardashian was going to. And a lot of those Bible studies in Hollywood were happening at Pat Boone's house. So Pat Boone is essentially like this pop star who goes very Christian, and he starts having these Bible studies at his house with a lot of celebrities attending, including Bob Dylan at the time was so interested in everything happening in these groups that he started attending them, and he got baptized in Pat Boone's pool, which is very interesting to me. And then there are other celebrities like Zsa Zsa Gabor, who was kind of known for being famous. She was the Kim Kardashian of her time, which is very telling because Kris Jenner is obsessed with the Gabor sisters, and I will get into all of that in a different section dedicated to Kris Jenner. But she was attending these Bible studies in Hollywood as well. So it was a star-studded event, and Robert Kardashian was going to these as the owner of a music magazine to rub elbows with famous musicians. At this time, Robert Kardashian is going through the checklist of all of the things he wants for his perfect little Christian life. He is working in music, he is dating young women, and he starts bringing Priscilla Presley to these Bible studies at Pat Boone's house. And the pastors that Pat Boone is having host these Bible studies at his house, some of them go on to start very charismatic cults. So Robert Kardashian is rolling up on some of his first dates with Priscilla Presley to a cult meeting. Like, I wonder why it didn't work out. So I don't think it was a coincidence that Robert Kardashian was rolling up to Pat Boone's house with Priscilla Presley, Elvis Presley's ex, because Elvis Presley was obsessed with Pat Boone. So he was like trying to pull this alpha dog rank thing, like, oh, you like Pat Boone? I'm good friends with him. I'm going to go over to his house and I'm going to bring your ex with me. Get off my case. Because Robert Kardashian was pissed that Elvis was still calling Priscilla late night, like all night long, one after the other, just ringing, ringing, ringing. And then finally, one night, allegedly, Robert Kardashian gets pissed, picks up the receiver, puts it on the pillow, and starts making sweet, sweet love to Priscilla Presley so Elvis can hear. And this is a story that was retold by Kris Jenner, so who knows how much of it's true, but that's a wild story. And mind you, while Elvis is calling Priscilla all day and night, he's dating Linda Thompson, which is a second connection to the Kardashian family. And this is Brody Jenner's mom. This is the future wife of Caitlyn Jenner. So at this time, this connects the Kardashians to Elvis in two different relationships. That's crazy. So Robert knows that he needs to settle down if he wants to be taken seriously in these conservative Christian circles. So he is trying to settle down with Priscilla. And she says, I can't settle down until Elvis passes away. He is on my ass about all this stuff. And I just can't feel comfortable until he passes on for us to be married and have this happy life, because we have a kid together. It's going to be complicated. So Robert ends up breaking up with her and then getting back together with Kris eventually. So this was interesting because Robert's like, I'm not going to wait for Elvis to pass away. Who even knows how long that's going to be? Elvis passes away about a year later. Imagine how different the entire world would be if Robert Kardashian married Priscilla Presley instead of Kris Jenner. Like, mind-blowing. Some of the people who came in to speak at these Pat Boone Bible studies were speaking in tongues and having prophecies. So this really was an evangelical Christian Pentecostal kind of church that was happening inside a Beverly Hills mansion. And I just have to imagine, with the amount of celebrities and influential people and judges who attended these Bible studies, this was a great place for Robert to rub elbows. One of the pastors that spoke at Pat Boone's house that Robert Kardashian brought Priscilla to go see was Ken Gullickson, who I believe Robert Kardashian kept a close contact with till the end of his life. Ken started Vineyard Church at one of these Bible studies. So this was like the early days of Vineyard coming about. And people who have left Vineyard Church have said it is a cult, and they have compared it to a cult. Various people have. So I think that Vineyard was in the beginning stages of becoming a cult. And even though this cult didn't work out for Priscilla Presley, she did end up joining Scientology just a few years later. So it was like she was ready for a cult, just not that cult. So now it's around 1977, and Robert Kardashian has rekindled his relationship with Kris. And this is great because his best friend also just started a new relationship with a young woman named Nicole. Only a couple of problems. One, OJ Simpson is 30, Nicole is a teenager. Two, OJ Simpson is married, and he's trying to go out on double dates with Robert Kardashian and Kris. And of course, Robert Kardashian knows OJ Simpson is married and knows that he's going out with this young woman, and he just turns a blind eye. Good Christian values, I guess. People around Nicole said that this relationship was pretty abusive from the beginning, and there's no way Robert Kardashian didn't know that, because Kris did know that. She talked about it in the future after Nicole's passing. So Robert Kardashian was essentially turning a blind eye to pretty much everything OJ Simpson was doing. Maybe it's because OJ was a celebrity and he just wanted to stay in good graces with him, or maybe he just truly did not care that OJ Simpson was doing some horrific things to the women around him. And OJ and Nicole dated for around 2 years while OJ was still married. So Robert and Kris get married. OJ Simpson is the best man. We don't know who he brought to the wedding, his wife, his mistress, or someone else, because Kris says now that they're married, they're living happily, and OJ starts coming over to stay with them for periods of time, like a couple weeks at a time. And during that, he would call somebody on the phone, hand the phone to Kris, and say, "Ask for Sally." So Kris would be like, "Hi, is Sally there?" Because she's still very young and has a young voice, and then hand the phone back to OJ when Sally picked up. Later on, Kris said she realized that she was basically calling teenage high schoolers who still lived with their parents, and she was calling to say like she was a young girl asking for Sally, when really it's a full-grown man in his 30s in the NFL calling teenage high school girls and using Kris Jenner to help him do it. Did everybody know that Robert Kardashian dated his cousin? Or is this something that people just don't talk about? Part 4 of The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, my deep dive on Robert Kardashian. And in this section, I'm going to be talking about OJ Simpson. So I do want to give a trigger warning for the crimes of OJ Simpson. So in 1978, Robert Kardashian and Kris Houghton tie the knot. She's about 22 years old. He's in his mid-30s, and his best man is OJ Simpson. Robert Kardashian finally has his nice young wife that he can brainwash, and Kris finally has someone who is rich who can take care of her. Now, I told you that Robert Kardashian started a magazine, R&R magazine, with his brother Tom in the early part of the 70s. Well, around this time, they sell that magazine, and it makes a pretty penny. I'm not sure if Robert and Tommy had shareholders. They most likely did, but they sold the magazine for around $12 million. In 1970s money, that is some dough. And 1979 is a significant year for Robert Kardashian because not only did he sell his magazine at a significant profit, but he also welcomed his first child into the world with his wife, Kris, Kourtney Kardashian. Welcome to the stage. And then the next year in 1980, Kim Kardashian was born. Then came Khloe in 1984 and Robert Kardashian Jr. in 1987. Now, by the end of the 1970s, Robert Kardashian is no longer practicing law. I like to say that this is his Shark Tank era because this is when he goes into being a family man, but he's also trying to start new businesses and see what the next big fad is going to be, hoping that it will be as profitable as his magazine sale. And while Robert Kardashian is trying to figure out his next big business, is it going to be frozen yogurt or movie tunes or all of these other things that he's trying to see if they're going to work for him, Kris starts to slowly move into the spotlight. She is living in Los Angeles while people are starting to get famous, and she's good looking. She might as well get in front of the camera. So she starts practicing to do things like commercials and infomercials, things like that. But she is moving into the spotlight during this time, and I don't think Robert Kardashian liked that very much because he wanted the nice little stay-at-home wife. Now, it seems like the further Kris moves into the spotlight, the further her and Robert Kardashian move apart. And it really seems like during this time, Kris is looking for more. She just wants more out of her life. She did settle down quite young. And I think that she was looking for not only purpose, but she wanted to start her own business because she sees how successful her husband is in starting businesses. So I think it was just kind of a natural progression for her. Now, Robert's spending more and more time on business deals and he's out and about. So Kris is spending more and more time with her trainer or tennis coach. And she doesn't like the gym they normally go to. So she asks her family friends, the Craneses, if she can use their gym for her and her trainer to work out. Well, the workout wasn't exactly what the Craneses thought it would be. Now, there are mixed stories. Some people say that Robert Kardashian sent out a PI to follow them, and this was one of many times Kris got busted having an affair. And some people say that she was busted by the Craneses. So who knows, but she was having an affair and she got caught. Who used to watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians and remembers the prank, Auntie Kris, it's Todd Cranes, when Scott would call Kris and say it was Todd Cranes? Well, Todd Cranes is a real person and Kris isn't his actual aunt, but they have a really close relationship because it was his family's gym where she was caught having her affair with her personal trainer when he was a little kid. And they stayed close like family friends going forward from that. And after Robert Kardashian and Kris separate, guess who he dates? That's right, his cousin, Denise Shakarian. Yeah, Shakarian, doesn't that name sound familiar? Maybe you remember it from the first half of this series. Demos Shakarian is related to Robert Kardashian's new kissing cousin girlfriend. Yeah, that Demos Shakarian, who is the cousin of Robert Kardashian also, and who also started televangelism in America as we know it. So Robert Kardashian dates his cousin for a couple of years, and then the next thing on his timeline, I guess, would be the OJ Simpson trial in 1994. And that is when Robert Kardashian reinstates his law license. Now, the Kardashians talk a lot about the narrative of things, and I think that's because they have set a narrative for certain things in their life. But when you really look on paper at Robert Kardashian's career, he only spent like 10 years as a lawyer, but that is the thing you would think defines him most when you ask his family or other people about him. It's always that he was a lawyer, not really that he was more a businessman. He did business more than he practiced law. So I think that that's interesting that he would reinstate his license for this trial, even though this type of law wasn't his wheelhouse. He wasn't practicing law previous to this, and he just all of a sudden needs to reinstate his law license so he can be part of this legal team for his best friend OJ Simpson. Now, I've told you guys previously about other Hollywood fixers, people who fix problems for celebrities, and there is speculation that Robert Kardashian was a Hollywood fixer, but I haven't found any evidence for that to be true. I do think he might have helped his friend in a case, but I don't think that this was a pattern for Robert Kardashian. So in the 80s, Robert Kardashian starts bringing OJ Simpson around to the Beverly Hills Bible study groups. I think he is setting up OJ Simpson to use religion as a shield because he knows OJ has DV charges that are about to be public. And remember, at these Beverly Hills Bible study groups are very influential people like politicians and judges and lawyers. And so him going to these groups to save face and be this good Christian boy, I think was part of the plan. And then OJ leans in maybe a little bit too hard because when he marries Nicole the next year, he makes this grand statement that he wants to get baptized at their wedding when he had just gotten DV charges in 88 and they're getting married in 89. And while this is happening, Nicole and Kris have gotten to be very close over the years. And I think Nicole confided a lot in Kris about what was going on with her relationship with OJ. And Kris is quoted as saying she thought that OJ was going to take Nicole's life. And then in 1994, on June 12th, Nicole Brown Simpson, longtime close friend of Kris and Robert, was found in a gruesome crime scene outside of OJ Simpson's condominium. After a low-speed, infamous Bronco car chase, OJ is arrested, and before the trial, after 20 years of not practicing law, Robert Kardashian reinstates his law license to be part of OJ Simpson's defense team. Now, Robert Kardashian knows OJ's history, and there's the whole Louis Vuitton luggage bag situation. And I think because of those and other factors, some people think that Robert Kardashian was a Hollywood fixer. But I haven't found anything to really support that he wasn't a Hollywood fixer. But I do think that he could have acted like one or utilized one to help his friend OJ more than once. And as a side note, OJ Simpson's estate is selling things off now that he's passed away, and just last month, the infamous Louis Vuitton bag got sold at auction along with OJ Simpson's Bible that Robert Kardashian gave him. And during this time, Kris and Robert are co-parenting, but they are not getting along because Kris obviously was very close with Nicole, and she thinks OJ did it and can't believe that Robert is sticking up for OJ in court. Even though OJ was acquitted for the horrific way that his ex-wife passed away, and Robert Kardashian was part of what was called the trial of the century by the media, Robert Kardashian never practiced law again after this trial. The Kardashians talk a lot about the narrative, quote unquote, that other people impose on them, but realistically, they are the master media manipulators because the narrative around Robert Kardashian is that he was passionate about being a lawyer. But was he? After the OJ Simpson trial, Robert went back to his business investments and occasionally did sit-down interviews about the OJ trial and questioned OJ's innocence after the trial. And after he called off his engagement with his cousin, he got engaged and married a few more times. And I think he might have proposed to every woman he dated because in 2003, he got esophageal cancer. And 2 weeks later, he married Ellen. And then 6 weeks after he married Helen, he passed away. And then later on, Helen sold off his journals or diaries. And the kids think that she exploited Robert and married him on his deathbed. And the kids really don't like Ellen. Apparently, when Robert passed away, he had money in a trust for his kids, so they would be financially stable after he passed. But I don't know if some of that was tied up in property. Something happened, and the Kardashian kids can't stand Ellen, and they feel like they were ripped off. And Robert Kardashian's story doesn't end after he passes away. In 2019, UCLA opens the Robert Kardashian Center for Esophageal Health with significant fundraising from the Kardashian family, who are billionaires and millionaires. Why are they fundraising? Why aren't they just giving the money over? And recently they celebrated 5 years of the foundation at the Hammer Museum that's owned by Armie Hammer's family. And in 2020, when the rest of us are on lockdown, Kim Kardashian can't take it anymore and she needs to get out, but one of her other properties just won't do. So she goes to Mexico to celebrate her birthday. And on that trip to Mexico, Kanye debuts a 3D hologram image of Robert Kardashian that is programmed to speak to Kim and her family. And it says basically a couple of different things, but one of them is, your husband Kanye is a great, 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 great genius or whatever. And then he says, don't forget to say your prayers at the end. One of the things that came out of those diaries that Ellen sold to the press were the prophecies that Robert Kardashian had for his children. And I'm actually going to read those when I talk more about the kids individually because they are interesting. So one last thing to tie all of this together. When OJ Simpson passed away, this tweet came out. And it was from someone who allegedly worked at USC and said that OJ had a history of assaulting young women, and the school covered it up because he was a star athlete. And this confession alleges that during the discovery part of OJ Simpson's trial in 1995, Robert Kardashian went back to USC and he went to the office of the dean of students. And because he knew about other women that OJ abused and the school paid off, and he didn't want that information coming up in the trial. He paid off the president of student affairs, who made anyone who knew sign an NDA. And once OJ passed away, apparently that NDA was null and void. And if this is true, this means that Robert Kardashian knew about the history of OJ Simpson and his abuse. He knew that OJ was not only just assaulting Nicole, which is horrific in itself, that he was doing this and he had a pattern of doing it. And he was trying to save OJ's image by taking him to Bible studies, by getting him slaps on the wrist. Because even when OJ got in trouble for DV before he married Nicole, he really got a slap on the wrist. He did not serve any time. And then he got acquitted for the trial of where her life was ended. And I don't think that Robert Kardashian didn't know any of this. And when he went on this redemption tour after OJ's trial to say, oh, well, maybe I guess he did do it. I don't know. I feel like he could have done it. He knew. Robert Kardashian knew because he helped cover it up, allegedly, in my opinion. And that's the story of Robert Kardashian without any interference from the Kardashians. The next section will be about Kris Kardashian, Jenner, Hooten, and I think it's appropriate that it's called The Devil Works Hard, but Kris Jenner Works Harder. Stay tuned. If this is the kind of story you're interested in, if you like the way I do breakdowns of drama, please engage with this, comment,